Good afternoon, it's Lee Cassidy from Tactile Technology with my regular Tuesday afternoon in the hot seat. And today we've actually got a guest from Chronosphere. We've got Brandon Bright. So I'll just bring Brandon in. Hi, Brandon. Welcome to my Tuesday afternoon in the hot seat. How are you
Thank you
today?
for having me. I'm good. I'm good.
So
Like I
what
was saying before, I'm a little out of breath from running up and down the stairs trying to get this lighting worked out, but it looks much better now, I think, hopefully.
Yeah, that's much better. Yeah, we were discussing before we started about the Peloton giving you exercise, but it's actually running up and downstairs getting replacement bulbs today
Yeah.
has been keeping you fit. So, but what would be good to
Uh,
start with is just give us a little bit of your background. So, where did
sure.
you grow up? Where did you school? And then, start us out. Did you go straight to technology, or did you do something else before that?
Yeah. So I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the Midwest area of the U.S. I I did always want to be an engineer. So my my plan going into college was to be an electrical and computer engineer. So I went to the University of Cincinnati. They have an engineering program there that's focused on doing year and a half worth of internships, which is a really great program in Ohio. And so, yeah, I wanted to be an engineer. I loved math and physics. I went there for engineering. And I would say 3 years into school, I realized that engineering really wasn't where I wanted to spend my time. There was always people in the class that were better and more efficient than me at writing code. Um, and I had done co-ops at NASA and Lockheed Martin and Texas Instruments, all these big companies, and they were great co-ops. But honestly, I was pretty bored with the details. And what really changed it for me is it is more of a personal story, but my dad was always in sales. And what I really liked about that was that he was always home. He was either at his home office or he was traveling for work. And so when he was home, he was present, and he was always bringing back gifts for us. And he always had some exciting story to tell about some customer thing that he did. Um, and so about 3 years into college, I saw that there was an opportunity at Texas Instruments, which is a semiconductor company,
Yeah,
one of
I'm
the largest in the world.
very familiar
Um,
to Texas Instruments.
yeah. And so they had an opportunity that was specifically for engineers to get into sales. So what they do is they usually pull about 30 to 40 engineers straight out of college to train them on sales. And you immediately go into being a sales engineer. So my first job out of college was doing that. Um, I was fortunate enough to be put in the Silicon Valley sales office after the training program. So that was my kind of dip into the startup scene. And I was at Texas Instruments for maybe 2 years before I just couldn't help myself. I needed to join a startup or build a startup. It's very hard once you get to the Valley not to want to be a part of that. So I ended up starting my own company. It was a mobile app around events. We were trying to build technology that allowed people to connect when they were offline at large events like music festivals or big stadiums. So that was my first startup. We had raised some money there and tried to do that for a few years. And after that, I joined a company that was backed by Andreessen Horowitz. It was a company focused on bringing high talent freelancers to enterprises. So basically having a network of 1,000 plus freelancers based in Silicon Valley and bringing those to large enterprises to build software. And then I landed at Chronosphere. So that's been my journey so far.
So you had a starting background in engineering, so you understand what it's about at least, around that software engineering
Totally.
component, and then you've then jumped straight into the sales game. I similarly had a technical background. I worked in flight simulation for a long time. That's why I'm quite familiar with Texas Instruments. We used a lot of components from Texas
Totally.
in simulation. So, I'm quite familiar with that. But it is quite a change moving from engineering into sales. What was the biggest
Yeah.
challenge for you? Seeing your father in sales is quite different to you doing it yourself. So
Yeah.
how do you find the first experience of moving into commercial sales?
Well, I love the Texas Instruments program because what it reminded me of is that the best way to be good at sales is to be natural, and to know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
and to be genuine. And so honestly, I didn't feel like it was a huge challenge because coming from an engineering background, like all I wanted to do was learn about the tech. And so the big difference was being able to effectively talk about that to a customer. So it was actually a pretty natural transition to being in tech and talking to startups in Silicon Valley about what hardware products they were building. And so honestly, it was a pretty natural transition. I think the big thing was all the business aspects that we didn't learn in college and engineering, right? Like obviously I'd never dealt with contracts, never done negotiation. So all of those soft skills of running a meeting or doing a lot of these background tasks are things that we had to learn on the fly.
I think in sales, there's a couple of things. One is that relationship building, because people buy from people, and
Yeah,
ultimately
totally.
from people they trust, but also to be able to be passionate about something, a particular product or service that you're delivering. You need to really feel confident in it and understand it well, and that comes across when you understand it well, with the people that you're speaking to about it and presenting to. I think is always a challenge for a lot of salespeople to know enough about the product or the service to be able to come across as passionate and actually understanding the product.
Yeah, yeah. One thing that it's totally true, and I learned this when I was in engineering, and I try to hold true to this even today, is that I'm not going to be the smartest at what I'm explaining. So, and usually our customers are the smartest, and
Yeah.
so I spend a lot of time listening to what they have to say, and then regurgitating that to the next customer. That's the goal is to learn a little bit more every time I speak to a customer on what they're trying to solve, and then somehow relating that to what products that I'm selling specifically.
I think there's always an old adage in sales, as you've got two eyes and two ears and one mouth, and you should use them in that order.
Yeah,
Lots
yeah,
more listening than talking, and I think that works in sales, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. What's funny is that when all of my personal friends and my family see me as an introvert, and they just can't imagine how I could be in sales. It's like because I'm not the person at the party that's outwardly having conversations and always has these crazy stories to tell. I'm usually just listening and just taking in and just being present. And a lot of my family and friends don't get it, but I tell them like that's really what the goal is. The goal is not to talk. The goal is to just listen and observe,
Yeah.
and then hopefully provide some level of insight or support.
So the term observe's quite good to introduce us into your current
Sure.
role at Chronosphere, because Chronosphere is
Yeah.
all about observability, and I don't think many people, especially in the UK, will know anything about Chronosphere. So it'd be good to
Sure.
have maybe a bit of an intro to the history behind it. I know
Yeah.
there's a strong relationship with some engineering that was done at Uber in the early
Mhm.
days, and also the experience of the two founders in doing a lot of that engineering. So it'd be good to give us a bit of history, if you could, of that piece.
Sure. I would love to. And this is the reason why I joined Chronosphere was the history and the founding of the company was so interesting, that it felt like I couldn't pass up this opportunity. And in fact, I was begging to be a part of the sales team in the early stages because of the history. So some history on the company. The two founders, along with a lot of the engineers that currently work at Chronosphere, came from Uber. They were a part of the team that they was an observability team. Now I will say that we're a monitoring solution, so we'll talk about the difference between monitoring and observability in our minds. But the observability team at Uber were similar to a lot of I would say, some of the first tech unicorns in the space, where they were running into a lot of the scale problems before everyone else was. I think that's still true today. They're usually the first ones to build
Yeah.
some open source tool or some tech, and then show everyone else how they did it. Um, and so Uber is no different than the others. And a lot of the early stage cloud native architecture and production of those types of cloud tooling systems um, really created an amazing way to build software. the growth of microservices, the growth of containers, the growth of being able to have smaller teams that have their own DevOps infrastructure. All of that's extremely helpful as you're building software, especially for a company like Uber that has so many different tools that they're trying to build for customers. On the flip side, being able to observe in this cloud native world with a ton of microservices and containers and a distributed system with a ton of teams is actually the opposite. It becomes extremely challenging. And so Uber, just like Netflix, just like Google, just like Facebook, they all started to run into a very similar issue, which is how are we going to observe and monitor billions of metrics and millions of containers across multiple teams, because their core user is, of course, the engineers within the company, and trying to provide a system that can speak across each team and effectively allow for each team to monitor when you have that many metrics and that many containers and microservices is an extreme challenge. And so that's really what Uber was trying to solve. That's what our founders were a part of. And that was what created the need for building a new tool. And so go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you consider the old days, I've been in technology about 40 years, so I remember the original mainframes and mid-range systems. So you'd have a single machine with one piece of code that was delivering a service. Yeah, so the metrics within it might be 10 to 20 metrics you might want to understand what's happening within it. You take that to a virtual machine world. Now you're running maybe 10 different virtual machines for that same application set. And again, you've got that multiplied by the number of versions that you run at any one time through, development, test, and into production. Then you move to containers, and it just goes off, accelerates even more. Because, now instead of having one piece of code that does everything, but you've got multiple versions of it, you've got now microservices. So that one piece of code becomes 10, 20, or 100 potentially, depending on the application that usage you've got. But the different versions, the different deployments. So you may have in multiple, cloud providers. You may have multiple availability groups. So again, it's exponential, isn't it? That growth of the amount of metrics and data you need to collect.
Yeah, totally. And I think this is actually where the term observability started to become more prevalent, because it started to become impossible to just monitor. When you get to that scale of metrics, observe is almost a better tool, because there's so much more that has to go on instead of just monitoring a hundreds or maybe thousands of metrics. Now you have much more than that. And to your point, like, this is where cardinality comes from as well. So high cardinality, a very ephemeral type of environment, which just means there's a lot of metrics that come in and out of the system at any given point. A lot of metrics that are important 1 minute, but are not important the next minute. So a lot of these new challenges and new terms came out of this type of environment.
Yeah, and then, in this world of containers, that is the issue, isn't it? Because it's a very dynamic world where things will appear and then disappear, like you say, ephemeral. And you need to keep track of this dynamic environment that's adopting and changing all the time. And also, one of the other changes between my 40 years of technology is that we would do software releases every 6 or 12 months. Now, some organizations, I believe Netflix do something like 17 releases a day. It's a continual process. Most midstream organizations, if they're running in agile development, will be doing a release every 2 weeks. At least something. If not, they've got multiple teams of developers working in an agile method and having multiple releases in that time. So that changes things again, because what you're monitoring becomes even more important every time you do a release, to understand, one, the performance, but also understand what's happening underneath the covers of these application sets.
Totally. Yeah. And this is the very first problem that Uber tried to solve. And I wouldn't say that Uber was alone in this. Like I mentioned, Google, Netflix, Facebook, they all were solving similar problems. The reason why Uber is so relevant, specifically in this conversation, besides the fact that our founders are now at Chronosphere, is that Uber was one of the first companies to open source what they built. So They open sourced a tool called M3. It is a metrics engine. It's a custom built time series database and a custom built ingest and query that is purposely built for time series. And that's what makes Uber specifically interesting in this space, is that they from the very beginning had the mindset of, we want to learn from what Facebook and Netflix and Google did. We want to work with their engineers, but at the same time, we want to open source this tool as we're doing it to, one, get feedback from the community, but also to share what we're building internally.
Okay, and what would you say is difference to people using other time-based things like Elastic and those type of technologies? Because a lot of people are using things like Prometheus or Elastic to do monitoring, or if they're wanting commercial products, using things like Splunk to ingest data, manipulate it, and then provide information and alerts on the back of it. So what's the difference what M3 can do?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, I would say, design differences. And we could probably have a 3-hour conversation about that. But in terms of the output and and what you get out of a tool like M3 versus Elasticsearch or Cassandra or a lot of the vendor solutions that are built on top of them, is the efficiency. So the challenge that Uber had as they were kind of getting into this billions of metrics and thousands and millions of containers was that the monitoring bill became a significant portion of their cloud bill. And that was one of the problems they were trying to solve. The other problem was the reliability of this monitoring solution at this scale became a problem as well. So one important design difference between M3 and a lot of these other solutions is there's 3 factors. So every single thing has quorum reads and writes. So there's basically 3 copies of everything. But on top of that, the query engine, the ingest was all purposely built to be efficient for a time series database at this level of scale. And I would say a big difference between M3 specifically in the TSDB space versus the newer players is that M3 was built around and for a company that had this scale. So they had the benefit of learning and designing and testing and growing around a system that was at that level of metrics. And so one thing that Chronosphere claims, and also that M3 claims, is that it's proven at scale, not just that it can scale. I think that's a key differentiator, and it's important, especially for a lot of the tech companies that are growing up today that are almost immediately jumping into this level of scale, or large enterprises that are transferring over to cloud native and are immediately getting into this scale as well. And so that's a core differentiator in terms of the design of the system and the use of it.
Yeah, so on the cost side, I do know of organisations that have gone down this route and utilised things like CloudWatch and effectively turned on CloudWatch for everything that they're doing, and getting to the point where it's actually cost them near as much to watch what they're doing as actually run the actual workloads for the customer base. So they start turning things back off again, so they become a little more blinded about what's actually happening, just because the cost is just so high. And then I've seen people utilize other technologies like Prometheus and other forms like Elastic, and they get to a point where it just doesn't satisfy the volume and also how much data is coming in, that density of data. It's coming in so quickly. It's not just the amount that you're storing, it's how quickly you're receiving that information, and sometimes it's just not capable of coping with it. And I think as well, when you go down the open source track, there's a lot of individual input from the organization to one, architect it correctly, and then also to keep it going. It becomes a piece of work in its own right, just to keep the monitoring capability running, and in the open source world.
I mean, open source has done an amazing job at building a community, especially in the cloud native space. There are amazing tools like Prometheus and Grafana. There are amazing tools for scaling Prometheus, but to your point, there's an insurance aspect to wanting a vendor solution that can manage this and have the SLAs and know that somebody's available. And the reality is, a lot of these fast growing tech companies or SaaS based companies or even large enterprises, they have to make a decision internally. Do we want to build an engineering team that builds or buys, and is monitoring a core piece of our engineering structure, or is monitoring a tool that we use to build our core engineering? And for, I would say 90% of companies, it's a tool. It's a tool that helps them get to a product goal. And so that's the type of company that usually would come to us.
I do apologize. My dog has decided to be noisy at this end.
That's the realities of
just
working
going to try and get it to be quiet. 1 second.
Yeah, no worries.
There's nothing like a live video stream, is there?
Yeah.
Things like that.
It's not real unless something like that happens. That's how you know it wasn't. There's no edits here. This is a live.
The next thing we need is a delivery driver to come with an Amazon delivery, and then we definitely show live.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm on the 3rd floor, is that my dog can be on the 1st floor and bark at as many delivery trucks as she wants to, and I won't be able to hear it.
I need to build another floor then. I've only got So, coming into Chronosphere a bit more then. So on top of the technology, you're actually delivering as a service. So you're actually putting it together and providing a completely supported platform rather than just giving people software to utilize and license software. So how do you think that gives additional value to potential customers?
Sure. So what M3 solved was that it is a highly efficient and reliable time series database. One thing that was obvious at Uber and is obvious for our customers is that you need a lot more than that in order to monitor effectively. And so a few pillars that we really focus on within Chronosphere is the management and control of having this many metrics, having high cardinality, having a highly ephemeral type of environment, and being able to control the metrics that come in. And so this is a core part of our platform. And when we say control, a good example would be a lot of the metrics have different use cases. You have metrics that you're using for debugging. You have metrics you're using for analysis. There's 5 to 10 different use cases for every organization on how they're going to use those metrics. And all of those metrics have different retention and resolution needs. So some metrics you might want for an hour, but at 1 second resolution. For some, you might want for 2 years, but at a 1 hour resolution. And so when you have this many metrics, having that level of control on the ingest allows for you to, one, spend less, but also have less noise within your system when you're monitoring. And so that's a key aspect to our platform. And it also provides even more efficient tool on top of the fact that M3 is already efficient, but also the control for each team to, one, understand the metrics that are coming into the system, and then control those metrics for different use cases. So that's like the layer above M3 that allows a level of control that you need when you have this level of scale. The level above that is being open source compatible. So we are not trying to be in the business of having hundreds of integrations. That's a very common old trend in the vendor space, is that we connect with everything. We're going to build you a dashboard that connects with this tool and a custom query for this tool. Because of how popular Prometheus is, because of how popular Grafana is and PromQL and a lot of the other open source languages, our objective is to be 100% compatible with those tools. It allows for companies to move to us in an efficient way. It allows them to not have some proprietary language on the ingest. It allows them to gain access to tools that are available in open source, so that if you're moving to Chronosphere and there's this Grafana dashboard that you really liked, then you can immediately pull that in and there's not any issues. So that's another piece that we've focused on, and we plan to always focus on, is that when you're moving to Chronosphere, you're not losing a lot of the open source community that comes with the CNCF Cloud Native Foundation tool set. And so that's another core aspect of it. So of course you're getting this software as a service, you're getting monitoring as a service, but you're also staying compatible with these open source tools that you're familiar with, and that the community is supporting. And then on top of that, you have this very efficient, reliable tool that provides management and control that you don't have with other systems.
Yeah, I think that's quite important because, like I say, if you went down the route of ending up taking proprietary components, you're stuck with that technology.
Totally.
But at least when you've got open source and compatible open source technologies, it makes it freer for you to move forward. And you're not handcuffed, as it were, into a particular technology, which I think is a major thing. Have you got any customers that you could tell us that you've got in the US and the kind of things that they're using the actual Chronosphere platform for?
So this is a topic that I wish I could go into more detail on at this stage. I can't say specific names as of now. I would say that if you follow Chronosphere, you will see some names pop up in the next few months that will be very common and appreciated and watched in the big tech space. I will just say in terms of use cases, because I think this will at least provide some level of context for the listeners here. There's really two different market segments that we focus on. And that is the tech organization that is either at scale or is fast growing. So that could be a fast growing SaaS company that is almost immediately jumping into a lot of metrics and scale, or a large tech company that is currently potentially using another vendor or has been using open source and kind of taping things together for a while, but wants a SaaS offering. The second type of customer that you'll see get announced here pretty soon is the large enterprise. And so I was mentioning before, a lot of these large enterprises, as they move into the cloud and then they adopt cloud native and they start to use more microservices and containers, they almost immediately reach scale. And they almost immediately reach the amount of metrics that would be in the millions or even billions. And so those types of companies as well are really interesting to us because we can provide a service to them that is cost efficient and does allow the level of control and management across potentially 15 to 100 development teams and users that are using a monitoring solution every day.
Yeah, because we have to remember that Chronosphere is quite a young company as well. So
sure, yeah,
it's only been around 2 years, isn't it? I believe, and the last year really has been a bit of a beta environment with most organizations, and a closed beta before that the previous year. So it's only really been introducing the technology and the type of service you offer for the last 12 months to people, predominantly in the US. I know you've got a couple of UK customers already, but sure. We really need to get people to see what they can achieve with it and the benefits using the technology, especially if they are in that fast growing tech space or large enterprise that is opening up into cloud native and is going to reach those large metric figures quite quickly and going to struggle with other technologies.
Yeah, totally. And it's not that I don't want to talk about our customers. It's that, like you mentioned, we've been in production with customers for just over a year. And one thing that is important to me and important to our marketing organization and even our founders is that when we tell the story, the customer is comfortable with it, but also we have enough data points to tell something that other organizations will appreciate and understand. Yeah. And so usually it takes 6 to 12 months for that organization to completely adopt and to grow and to use and to understand exactly the values that they're getting out of Chronosphere. And so we're starting to get to that point where we're going to have really good stories, and those will definitely come out in the next 3 months.
Well, it's been great to have you on and learn a bit about your background. And let's say a lot of people see sales as being a dirty game, but without having salespeople, people don't know about the technology or service or product offerings that are out. And can't get hold of them and utilize them effectively. So I've been in commercial sales myself for over 20 years, and I don't have any issue with salespeople, and I encourage people to try and talk to me about products and service they have, rather than a lot of people shying away from it, which we do from time to time. But I'm really interested to see how Chronosphere grows, especially as it starts to get into more mainstream customers, and it'd be really interesting to know some of the use cases that you've had once they're available to release. So it'd be great to have you on again and go into more depth in that area. So closing out, where do you think Chronosphere is going now? So that you just launched into the market, really. Where are you going to go? What do you think's the drive behind it? I know you mentioned these types of organizations that are challenged by these large number of metrics, but what do you really think the drive will be for people to utilize Chronosphere?
Yeah, so our objective, as most early stage companies, is to learn from our clients, use these first clients to tell us what future clients may need, and to build a solution that not only is a great monitoring solution, but potentially a great observability solution. So we didn't really get into logs and traces, but in the future, we're certainly interested to see how that might be connected to a metric solution. We spent a lot of time thinking about the vision for the company. I think that's where the next 2 years will lead us. So one, learning from our customers, and two, just understanding how a full observability suite would be valuable for an organization.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time today. And so we'd only briefly spoken earlier today before we did. But I just wanted to make sure that and people did get a grasp of what Chronosphere is about before we start to talk to people about it in the new year. But I'd like to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and hopefully it'll be a very productive and beneficial year for Chronosphere and Brandon Bright as well.
Thank you, Lee. I really appreciate it. Happy holidays to you and all the listeners as well.
Well, I'll just shut things down at this end.